Hello. Today I'd like to talk about this book, The Energy Evolution by Viktor Schauberger, and give my thoughts on it, what I took away, and also talk about one of the misconceptions I feel exists about Viktor Schauberger's work. So Viktor Schauberger, for those of you who found this video randomly, was a naturalist, a biomimicist in the early 1930s. He had some very interesting ideas about technology, about water, about fluid dynamics, and I've always been interested in these kinds of alternate science types, such as Viktor Schauberger, so I gave it a read. This is an English translation of the original German work. It has some of his patents, some articles by him, some articles about him, and also what looked like just some lab notes, ways that he was explaining his concepts to the people of his time. So, quite interesting book. And it makes some pretty interesting claims. And some are more outlandish than others, for sure. Viktor Schauberger was definitely a competent designer, and he built real things that were useful and that people are still kind of tinkering with. There hasn't been the kind of revolution or evolution that he was hoping for based on his work. And having read the book, I have a theory as to why. So Viktor Schauberger talks a lot, and if one is somewhat familiar with his work, one will have heard the term implosion technology as opposed to explosion technology. So he was very much interested in sort of the opposite of the expansive waste heat producing machinery that was existent in his time, and he wanted to make a counterpoint, a yin to the yang. Quite literally, actually. He thought that most things like motors and a lot of hydrokinetic turbines actually were, because they were creating excess heat, that they were kind of what one would say overbalanced yang with not enough yin, and he wanted there to be as much implosion technology as there is explosion technology. That hasn't happened, obviously. A lot of people find Viktor Schauberger's work interesting, but there hasn't been a huge amount of development on it. And having read this book, I do have a theory as to what he was talking about as a counterpoint to this explosion yang technology. What he imagined implosion technology was. And I think what he kind of discovered, although he never says this explicitly, I think his understanding of chemical energy and of chemistry was not at a level where he would have said this. But what I think he observed was a lot of it seemed to be related to the fact that water is densest at 4 degrees Celsius, and that if it's warmer than that and it gets compressed, the molecules will actually get more organized. Now, I have only an undergraduate level of fluid dynamics, and I studied renewable energy. Turbomachinery was a part of what I studied. I had to pass fluid dynamics, but it was mostly designed for aerospace engineering students. So a lot of what was interesting to me was in other classes. So I have only an intermediate, at best, level understanding of fluid dynamics myself. But looking at his machines and his designs that he describes in here, and the ones that I know have been reproduced since then. And looking at this odd property of water, that it cools down as it gets compressed. I have a feeling that that is both why a lot of his machines have results that are kind of unexpected, and also why there hasn't been a lot of work built on his designs. Because when you think about compressing a fluid and it cooling down, or its natural temperature being cooler when it's compressed, that violates a naive understanding of the laws of thermodynamics. And I think that that's probably why people just didn't really know what to do with a lot of his work. And I think he himself, while he was a very skilled technologist and able to build a lot of very interesting designs, he didn't have the theoretical background to really describe this, but he did seem to be talking about our understanding of thermodynamics being naive. And what I also find very interesting about that is that a naive understanding of thermodynamics would also predict there to be no such thing as life, because life is self-organizing. It reduces entropy locally. It creates energy in the form of things other than heat, and it does so in a self-sustaining way. So I almost get the sense that Viktor Schauberger's insights into water and his ability to manipulate these quite interesting properties of water by compressing it and rotating it and accelerating it. He did a lot of these very strange things and got some strange results. I almost feel like there's a connection between the properties of water that he observed and the reason that life and water are so synonymous. And I mean, we think of, if we say we found a habitable planet, what we mean is that it has liquid water, that there's water that stays liquid for decent amounts of time. Reading Viktor Schauberger's work on water and fluid flows and the way that he thought about the difference between explosion technology and implosion technology and the potential he thought that implosion technology had, it feels like there is something there, and it is probably not accidental that a lot of his designs mimic living things so much, because there does seem to be a connection there between this tendency towards self-organization, even at the molecular level of water, when it's manipulated in quite large ways. I mean, his earliest successes were in making log flumes. So he really he understood fluid dynamics on a pretty big scale, and he got, like I said, some pretty interesting results, which I think relate to this strange property of water, that it is a liquid that is at its densest when it's quite cool, and that compressing it, therefore, would at least incline. And this is, again, I wish I had some insights from someone who had a better understanding of fluid dynamics than me, but I would expect, because water is densest at 4 degrees, that if you take water and you compress it, that it would tend to align the molecules. And in Schauberger's case also, he seemed to really have success in converting the thermal energy of water into almost a kinetic energy. So it's a very, very fascinating, thread that one might be able to pull on if one were so inclined. Personally, I wasn't that inclined. His discussions seem to be more also about personal health and what makes water refreshing, which is interesting. He was a big fan of cold water, which kind of makes sense given the given that a lot of his work seemed related to these fundamental properties of water and where it is at its lowest entropy. So quite fascinating there, and I can see why, given the way that it doesn't jive with the version of entropy that we're taught in high school, why that would, I think, scare a lot of people off, and maybe why there haven't been as many people continuing his work as he would have hoped. One other thing I did want to bring up, and this is just an aside, but I know a lot of people who are maybe arm's length fans of people like Viktor Schauberger, think that he was involved with making flying saucers, and that there exists technology that that could bring us outside the Earth's atmosphere with much less effort expanded than we use with the chemical rockets that we use today. Having read this cover to cover, having looked at his notes, I can definitely say that if that technology exists, Viktor Schauberger wasn't working on it, because he does describe some manned aerial craft in here. And he clearly thought that his designs had a lot of potential, but nothing that he describes would work outside of atmosphere. He does talk about the dynamics of why he thought things worked, and I do wish that he had collaborated with some really skilled chemists who could talk about what was happening at a molecular level. But even from his understanding of compression and expansion of the fluids, of the fluid medium, none of what he describes in this book would work outside of the Earth's atmosphere. So he was definitely not involved with anything of that nature. And it's a bit of a misconception that I do want to clear up, because these things get repeated a lot, and it bothers those of us who hope there's something really there, because wrong place to look if that's what you're into. But anyway, that's the book. If you're interested, as I am, in these kinds of, I don't want to say blind alleys of science, but paths not taken. Viktor Schauberger was one of the first biomimeticists. He made some very interesting designs, and clearly very skilled, very much a pioneer. And if you're interested in the kinds of things he did, both the things he was successful at and the things that he thought he could do with more time and funding than he had, might be worth a read. There's a lot there. If you're interested in seeing the kinds of technology that one might come up with if one has a different perspective on the nature of the universe, Viktor Schauberger is definitely one of the more interesting characters out there. So it might be worth your time.